The Utah Jazz are coming off a playoff series loss against the Denver Nuggets where they blew a 3-1 lead and lost in the first round. That series was all throughout entertaining, loved that series, but the Jazz ended up losing here. And they right now strike me as a team that may be in the middle of the Western Conference. They are playoff contenders, but I don't know for sure if they are championship contenders. And yes, they didn't have a 20 points per game guy in Bojan Bogdanovic in the bubble, so that hurt the Jazz a lot. Bojan was an important piece for this team because he is that other scoring option who can shoot the 3-ball, playoff ball, handle the ball when you need him to, pass and score overall for this team. He helped pick up a lot of slack in some games for this team offensively, and he was really having a good season for the Jazz. He was that extra needed offense, and you always miss a guy like that in the playoffs. Had they had Bojan, they may have been in the second round, but nonetheless, the Jazz still could have closed out the Nuggets as they were up 3-1 against them. I think this team did regress defensively over the years. They lost a lot of defensive guys in Jay Crowder, Favors, even though they just brought him back, Ricky Rubio, and Thabo Sefolosha. But still a solid defensive team with Conley, Ingles, O'Neal, and Gobert really build this team's defense. But in the years past, they were recognized as a top defensive team in the league. Not so much this season, and actually their perimeter defense killed them as Jamal Murray went off against them in the playoffs. The Jazz did extend Donovan Mitchell 5 years, $195 million, and I'm glad Mitchell got paid because he is the man for this Jazz team. Donovan Mitchell is a superstar in the making, and all you have to do is watch that Nuggets series to see why. So I'm really happy he got paid. They also signed back Jordan Clarkson to a 4-year deal, $52 million. And Clarkson has been a guy who is a big plus off the bench, another scorer who can come in and be that main guy for the second unit, so retaining him for the Jazz was big. Then they signed back Derrick Favors for 3 years, $27 million to return to this team, so they signed another guy who could be a backup big to Rudy Gobert, and Derrick Favors is a solid inside offensive player and good defensive player as well. The team basically have all the core from last season. They went 44-28. They were a good offensive team and solid defensively. Not really any activity in trades, and the bench for this team includes Clarkson, Ingles, Favors, Niang, and they just brought in their rookie Udoka Azubuike, who could be another backup center for this team. Strong physical player who could play inside, rebound, could be a rim protector, and could just be a backup big for this team. The bench could be better. It could be better, but the Favors signing does improve it. They have Mike Conley, and his contract is kind of especially if he's giving you up and down performances like he did in the course of the season. Granted, he did play really well in the bubble. A lot of good performances from him, and he was being that reliable second option on this team and also in the playoffs, but he had one bad game in game 7, which was a crucial game. He shot the ball poorly, 2 for 13 field goal shooting and scoring 8 points, but he did have 7 assists. But it seems like Conley has found his fit on his team. Started the season struggling, but found his groove, and hopefully he can continue that going into next season. But nonetheless, he has to stay consistent with the Jazz. If the offensive options are going to be Mitchell number 1, Bojan number 2, Conley number 3, Conley has to stay consistent. He was showing signs of that, and it was just that dreaded game 7, so I'm expecting a much better production from him next season. And he is on the last year of his contract, and with Mitchell growing as a playmaker, this may just make Conley expendable if the Jazz do really want to move on from him, but that's a if, and his play through the season will determine that. So overall, this team's offense looks good. I don't have worries from that end. Then they have Rudy Gobert, who is the best rim protecting big in the league. Majority of his shots are spoon fed though, and doesn't really have much to his offense. Not much of a post game or can space the floor of shooting. And this is a guy who is looked at to be the team's main piece, maybe seeking out a max contract, but I wish he would give more offensively than what he is already. But the Jazz were already a good offensive team with Bojan there, so I don't really blame Rudy too much on that. Rudy is just playing his role, and granted, he did a really great job in being a defensive rim protecting big. He did have some problems with his playoff performances, and that's another thing that people would look to criticize him on. So I don't know if the Utah Jazz will extend him or give him big money. That's another thing we would have to look at in the future if the Jazz will give him a big time contract. And he's also just a walking double-double, and him being able to grab offensive boards really helps in more offense for this team. Can he be a better free throw shooter and better offensive player? Yes, but his game is solely based on him anchoring his team's defense. They should look to bring in a backup point guard and overall just a defensive type guard. Moutier, I don't expect him to be back on his team, but overall the team has to be healthy and hopefully climb back to being a top defensive team in order to compete for a championship. And also, I wish they sought out a big who can space the floor a bit. I do like the Derrick Favors signing, but a backup big who can shoot can give the team more versatility with their lineups. And that's really much it overall for this team. This is a run it back team because of how last season ended. And granted, they were a close game 7 away from a second round appearance without their 20 points per game score. The Jazz have the tools to compete. With their star Donovan Mitchell getting better and becoming a superstar, they will be a team in the mix next season in the Western Conference. But they do have some questions to answer. Does the Jazz truly believe with the roster they have now, can they really contend for a championship in a tough Western Conference? The past 2 years, the Jazz were bounced in the first round. The odds they jumped from just barely getting out of the first round to the NBA Finals, the odds are slim there. And if they get bounced out the first round again, this team is going to have some question marks of their future.